I think that if anyone who's listening is in a rut, move to a new city or get into a new environment. Your environment truly shapes you. I think if I had not moved to New York, I would not know half the things I do today about myself.
When I got back to New York recently, I made it my mission to sit down with all the people who inspire me so they can share their lessons with all of us. And to kick things off, I had the chance to sit down with my good friend Elizabeth, and we talked about how she found her true self even though her environment wanted her to become someone else. Have fun. I have a great guest today, which is Elizabeth. We met at Goldman, funny enough. None of us are working at Goldman anymore. And I think Elizabeth, one of these people I wish I would have known before I actually moved to New York, like back in Germany when I thought, hey, maybe I think there's more like to explore. I think there's more to actually achieve. But I was still younger and everyone was already older doing these things. So for me, it was a hope. Then running into people like Elizabeth, who is now working at Amazon. Before that, worked at Goldman, and before that, worked at eHarmony. You worked at Goldman, I think, for 2 years, right? We started around the same time.
Yep.
I think we
Two and a
quit
half years.
2.5 years even. Oh wow.
hmm
And now you're at Amazon, but I think like one of the most interesting facts is you're 25, and I think that's the thing that motivated me always is to see there are actually young people who are achieving a lot. But what I love about like the story and something we want to touch up today is that you're an entrepreneur at heart. You're very growth mindset ish. You love just improving yourself, exploring things you want to change. And you shared a very interesting story last time we talked, which was a week ago. And like, people who know me know how I'm a big believer in your environment determines who you are, who you become. So if you change your environment, you can also definitely change who you're becoming. And you have a very interesting story, how environment shaped you and is continuing to shape you. So I'm very happy we can actually explore some of that. But is there anything to add to who is Elizabeth and where you are?
Yeah, thanks, Flo, for such a warm and wonderful introduction. Hi, guys, I'm Elizabeth. Flo is actually one of my inspirations. So it's so nice to hear that we both think so highly of each other. But he is somebody who I thought was one of the few who actually pursued life more than just his job. There was more to him than just coming to work. He really wanted to produce value. And so I think that's how we connected. And I'm so grateful that we're still in touch, even though we're on opposite sides of the country. But yeah, like Flo said, we met at Goldman. When we first met, we were both new. So I think our newness energy was really matched. We were both like super excited. We were like, oh my gosh, we're at this huge financial institution. Like, what can we do now? It felt like the world was at our fingertips. And it literally was. If you go to the top of the Goldman floor, you could see all of New York below you. So you really felt like, okay, I'm here. So what's next? And here I am today. I'm 25 years old. And what I do for a living is I inspire customers through building amazing products. On a job description, it's called product management, but I didn't choose the job for the title. I chose the job because I was able to control and own a product that would be able to influence not only your customers, but the people that you work with. And I thought that was a really cool and amazing job. And I get to do it at a really cool company called Amazon. And so, besides what I do for work, I am half Mexican, half Chinese. And I think growing up in a multi-racial family and with two different cultures was really interesting. And I think it also leans into what we're going to be discussing today, which is how I found my identity in a world where sometimes people don't want you to be you, and it's easier for you to not be yourself to be successful, but that's not the case. So, but I know we're going to dive right into that, but wanted to quickly introduce myself.
Great introduction. Wow, fantastic thing. Just hearing about like that's something I'm super interested in diving in as well. Is like how your family potentially shaped like the way you're like you chose and now you're choosing and moving forward. But I think it's a great segue for us, and I think it has been made like very easy for us to also dive into this topic because our team at Goldman. It's like we were part of the Marcus team, which is or has been, I don't know about like now, but it has been in the news recently about work environment. I was very guarded from that experience in the beginning because we came in through acquisition and no one really knew like what we were doing. So I haven't like had like the full experience for like the full 2 years I was there. You on the other side, you came in like the regular way as a smart person, which I think is a harder way to come to Goldman. And you worked like the full 2.5 years like in this environment that is now being used as like a prime example of yeah, product tech in the financial industry. And so I think it's very interesting for me to basically get these insights of how was it for you. You mentioned like you get pushed in a certain direction, like we experienced it a lot, but you like more like all the stories I know are pretty much like stories from friends of mine like you who told me how it affected them. I think that's something where we really align to is because how you mentioned in the beginning, we didn't come for the company, we came more for the mission, and the mission was always or up until the points where we might forget it, but it was I believe it was always about us and how we can develop something that has kind of like our spirit in it, that how we can enrich people's lives and do these things. And back at Clarity, we had like everyone had this spirit and mindset, so we connected a lot. But then being in this big institution with a lot of people and what we talked about last time, a lot of very smart people, which I believe are not used to their full potential because there's some force nudging them, driving them. And I think that's something I want to explore and hear from your side because you went through it and you came out of it and you changed like a lot. And I'm curious to know like who were you before you came to Goldman? What made Goldman you or tried to make you, and who are you right now? So do you want to give us like a brief, just like a brief overview of like can we meet Elizabeth before actually working at Goldman and what changed?
Yeah, definitely. I want to start off by saying that I almost didn't apply to Amazon. And it was because I didn't think that I could get a role like Amazon because I didn't believe in myself anymore. And so now I'll go back to the beginning. So, as Flo said, my environment that I grew up in truly paved the way for how I eventually am today, in the sense that growing up, I was always taught to be quiet, be silent, and to be this person that my parents wanted me to be. And if you take a step back and you think about it, essentially your parents do have some weight in who you become because they are your financial sponsors, right? Like you live under their roof, they pay for your food, your clothes, and so you are in a sense indebted to who they want you to become. And I think for me, I was like, okay, I need to be this person that my parents want me to be. They want me to, be quiet even when I don't agree, or to, just respect authority even when they're saying something that's wrong. And I think that's who I became. And I quickly realized that the environment that I was in was telling me that I couldn't be myself and that I shouldn't be myself because it wasn't going to be a successful route for me. And so, if you had met me in high school or even before that, you would have been surprised to hear me speaking now because I rarely spoke probably 5 words to most people. And which is really sad because it limited me. Like when I applied to colleges, I only applied to 5 schools in Southern California, and I'm from Southern California, meaning that I had a limited point of view in life. You fast forward to today, um, I graduated from Pepperdine University in Malibu, California. And then about a few months after I graduated, I got this message on LinkedIn for a job opportunity in New York. And I would have never applied to a job in New York because I was so comfortable. I was in this rut. I was like, you know what? I'm in LA. My family is close by. I think I should be here.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until that recruiter, Michaela, if you're watching this, you gave me an open door that I am so glad I took. And I got to Goldman. And so that's when I moved across the country and moved to New York. I think that if anyone who's listening is in a rut, move to a new city or get into a new environment. Your environment truly shapes you. I think if I had not moved to New York, I would not know half the things I do today about myself. The great thing about moving to a new city is that no one is telling you who to become and no one knows who you used to be. I
Yeah.
think sometimes you're scared to become who you really want to be because you know that other people know your past or know your mistakes, know your failures, or know how embarrassing it was that you were so quiet in high school. But you could go to a new city and just start a fresh slate and be who you are. And so when I got to Goldman, I had that same energy as Flo. We were like, oh my gosh, we're on top of the world type of mentality. Like, who can we meet and who are going to be our new friends? What cool things can we learn from different people? And, who are we going to become in the next 5 years? I don't think we ever thought that like Goldman was going to be our end game. I thought of it as kind of like a channel to get to who we wanted to be. And so your work environment is also very important because you want to respect your boss because they financially pay for you to be there. And I think there were times where I was told to become this persona that I was not. I was told to speak in a certain way. I was told not to speak in other ways. And so I was just pulled back and forth in who people were telling me to become. And I believed that I needed to listen to it to be successful. I believed that I needed to lose part of myself to become successful at a company. And as a result, it was really hard for me to speak up in meetings. It was really hard for me to produce good work because I was constantly afraid I was going to miss a mark in some way or another.
Hmm.
And eventually I thought that I was a bad product manager. I was like, I can't do anything right. I can't even do a simple ticket right. Like there's something wrong with me. And I truly believe that. I truly questioned myself. And that's why I said earlier that I almost didn't apply to Amazon because I didn't think that someone would take me because I believed that I wasn't good enough. And I think the coworkers that I had at that time who also went through something similar, they had this mentality like, this is just reality. You just got to live with it or go find a different job.
Yeah.
And I think I had wished there were mentors who were like, no, I think I should support you and help you find your voice here. Like I wish there were people who were more senior than me who saw me and were like, I see, Elizabeth's potential. I see another person's potential and I want to help them grow here and find a voice. And I don't think anyone was brave enough to do that. Like everyone was really scared to stay within their persona. And so I think being in the community that you are is so important because I feel like I didn't have enough people supporting me and like pushing me to be myself. And even my friends outside of work, like I'm so grateful for their support and they were, they gave me love, they listened to me, but at the same time, they didn't know exactly what I was going through. And because they were
Hmm.
going through happier or better work situations. And so I also felt like no one understood me, no one got me and it was a lonely and long period. But at the end of the day, I reminded myself who I am, and I was like, you know what? I think I am better than this, and you have to remember like who you are. Like I came to New York because I wanted to find myself. And becoming a product manager is really hard. It's a very competitive field. But even though people were telling me that I needed to be this, I needed to be that, or I wasn't good enough, I knew that like, no matter what, I'm still going to go for it because innately I'm ambitious at heart and I wanted to achieve that goal. And so, yeah, here I am today at Amazon. I'm in a much healthier, I'm happier work environment. I feel like I'm actually good at my job. And it's funny because I was doing my work and I was like, this comes so naturally to me. I feel like I
Hmm.
have everything's flowing so well. My ideas are like coming out so well. And I'm like, wow, like being in the wrong environment for me really shut me down. It's not that I wasn't good enough, it's just I wasn't in an environment that allowed people to be good at their job.
Yeah.
And I think finding that is so important. And I think everybody will have an outlet where they will flourish. And you just really need to find that.
It's what I like about your story is that it takes us, like it has an ending to it, because what I think or what I struggled with the most, and like when I were in similar situations is like and you were talking about this, like there's this period where you're just alone maybe, or it involves more trust in hoping that it will be better on like the other side after you go through this, but you don't know until much later. And I think like something, and we talked about this, and I'm curious to hear if that has influenced like you or even like slowed you down a little, is if you're coming from like a good place, like that being a good place on paper, like people telling me it's like, hey, you work at Goldman, that's like very prestigious and you should do that, but I internally knew it's not the right place for me, at least right now. So I'm curious, like how, like knowing that, like was that something where you that kind of like blocked you and you had to take a step back to be like, is like like you said, like is that maybe life, like isn't it getting like what it, if it isn't better on the other side? But apparently there's like this one force in like both of us that you had too, to be like, it's got to be better somewhere else. Like I'm probably judging myself on the wrong metrics, I'm in the wrong environment. It's like, were you slowed down by this? Were your environment telling you a lot, hey, it's like, don't complain, like you work at Wall Street, it's like that, there are definitely worse place to be. Did that like slowly convince you, and try to, did you try to negotiate with yourself?
Yeah, totally. And when my friends would tell me, and even my family, they're like, you're in such a good place in your career. Like you're working at, the best, bank in the world, basically. And why are you not grateful? They basically made me feel guilty for not feeling grateful for where I am. And don't get me wrong, I am grateful. Like I wouldn't be at New York without Goldman. But at the same time, you have to realize that you don't owe anyone anything. Like if you're not growing or if you're not flourishing, you have the freedom to leave or to make a new decision or to seek other opportunities. And I think it's brave when you identify that, hey, this isn't for me. I think the more they would tell me, like, hey, you should just be grateful. You should just stay at Goldman. It made me even more scared because, like, I can't stay here longer. Because I
Yeah.
would think, like, oh my gosh, if I stayed in the same place I am today for more than like another year or two, like, oh my gosh, who would I be? Like, I don't even recognize that person. And so, nothing wrong about, the company. Of course, these are our own opinions, but I think it's more just about get out of environments where you can't flourish and where you can't be yourself.
That's like, you touched on very interesting points, and it's, for me it's always, what's very interesting to me are these like subtle things, like the things you're saying. Like I definitely recognize being like through a similar transition, like the comfort and like accepting certain things and realizing that over time, and that's been like a big factor for me too, is like observing me throughout the journey and realizing if I would stay here for a longer time, I would change. And my biggest fear was that I would stop being creative. I would stop being outspoken. I would have like the side of me being stripped away. And I noticed that, and I was talking like a lot with my family about that, being that I won't recognize myself anymore, which I believe, or I feel like there's a lot of people who might feel similar, but they might have just like this large voice coming, be like, this is it, you're an adult now, this is the new life, like fun's over, now you have to work for 40 years and this is your life, just accept it. And I think it's very easy to accept, especially if they pay you enough. So I'm wondering, and this brings me to the comfort point, because like I definitely agree, it's like moving somewhere else for the exact same reasons like you were saying. So you can redefine yourself, you can get rid of some of the baggage and what people might think of you. But how, like now for you is like redefining yourselves, like what does it mean in a place of like when eventually it might even be comfortable to not redefining yourself, even though it might not be comfortable, but you know it. And to me, like something that I felt is, I had phases where I got really comfortable in the uncomfortable and not in like a growth mentality, but I had like people I really didn't like working with, but I knew what to expect. And it was easier for me not to make the change into something I don't know, and I'd rather would have stayed in the known even though I didn't like it. So I'm curious for you, is like, how did you had that thought, and did you have a process to like convince yourself, hey, it's okay to move again, because you did the jump, LA to New York, and now like you couldn't even sit back and be like, now I'm here. You're like, all right, back to now Seattle. um how was that like?
Yeah, definitely. I think at that point, I was really eager to be in an environment where I was going to grow. And for me, that was a priority over the city that I was in. And it was a hard decision. I love New York and I love the person that I grew to become in New York. But what's really exciting for me is that I'm going to be moving to Seattle in a few months. And that's someplace that I never expected myself to live. It's very different than New York. New York is a lively, busy city, and Seattle, it's a much more relaxed. And so I'm excited to learn more about myself in this unknown, uncomfortable environment because through these opportunities, you gain more of your identity that you wouldn't have gained if I had not taken this opportunity. And so I think it's interesting that as you grow older, you realize different things about yourself because you're with different people every year of your life. Like the people I was hanging out with last year, I'm not really hanging out with today because last year I was in New York and now I'm in Los Angeles. So it's different. And I think I'm interested to see where this uncertainty and where this uncomfortable environment will lead me to become. And so I'm also in the mentality that we're all young. Like eventually we all know that we want to settle down or maybe have a family. And I think for me, I'm like, how much can I learn about myself before I focus on another life, which is my kids? And I really want to be a great mother to them in the future, but now is the time to really explore who you are and yeah, I'm going for the uncomfortableness.
I think that's such an important thing to hear. Because I mean, like the story just summed up, like knowing like all the things like you were able to explore, you were able to learn, like you mentioned yourself, came from the unknown, the uncomfortable. Same for me. It's like if I think back and I remember it's like I was back in Germany, I was so ready to move to New York up until the point where I actually had to fly. And then I was so ready to not move to New York. Um,
Yeah.
and my mom gave me the nudge. She was like, just check it out. You just stay there for like 2 weeks, but at least like you can say I've seen it and I decided against it, and never, and I can tick off the box and I don't have to like eventually worry about what would have happened if I went. And then everything that now inspires me came from New York. Like there's no real thing other than like the my core drive of family and like core like together, that I took from Germany, but I feel like everything that shaped me to who I am and it even gave me like a view of what's even possible came from that one decision to be uncomfortable. So I feel like that's something I like I can't tell people enough like how good the reward is to, or potentially good the reward is. And even if it's bad right now, it's like the long-term reward, you don't even know what's possible. So I love that you're like still not done. It's like that was one chapter, next, and then see like wherever it takes me. And I think, and that's like my vision too is like that, or my view is that like what I experience right now is like like you have one life, like, and I don't want to get like super spiritual, but like is it really, it's like what does it mean to be uncomfortable? It's like if there's so much more you can accomplish, like oh, I sometimes see my life more as a video game. It's like what are things that are just possible, and I try to take the emotions out of it. And like one of the things, like the guiding principles for me was like what if I did, like what if everything I touched just works? Like what would I do differently? And I think this is really like just even for me, like hearing how you're not done yet. It's like this is like, and I know it's like I know how you think because we think very alike. It's like I know Amazon isn't your goal. It's like it's just like a stepping stone, and I assume you probably don't even know what like where's the end gonna be, because it doesn't matter, as long as you keep moving forward. I wonder though, and that's something I noticed with like all my friends who went through similar situations. Now, when you move somewhere else, you become someone else, and like something that we learned, like my wife and I learned over the last year when we went home and we visited family, we stayed with like close to family over the pandemic, and and there's this conflict going on all the time between who we are and who people expect us to be, and that's less that like, it's more like the person that they still remember and they know, which isn't like how we became. So it's like for us it became this ongoing thing of how can I be more myself, at the same time can live up to like these maybe even old expectations. Did you experience something similar now coming back to LA for a while to realize this is like new Elizabeth meeting kind of the old Elizabeth.
Yeah, and even when I was in New York and I'd come home for like the holidays or like weddings and I would see people, I think inside I was like so excited to show people that I finally found myself.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if you felt the same way, but inside I was like, "Oh my gosh, I finally found myself. Now let me go see my friends and just be myself, like be my true genuine self." And then I think with people who had known me before, they didn't like want to accept the change. And I think it's because they knew me as somebody that was who was quieter. And I think when you're quiet, you submit to friendships more easily and you're more willing to be that secondary friend, if that makes sense. Like there's always like the primary and the secondary. And I think they didn't want to accept that I had grown into my own person and I didn't need to be the secondary friend anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I think that's just part of growing up. And I think it's like disappointing that like other friends don't also want to see you grow and be yourself. And I think that's when you need to, like, again, check your environment and be like, who do you need to keep being yourself? Um, and then it's funny because another perspective is that like like other people would be like, wow, I always knew you could do this. And they want to take credit for me becoming who I am.
Oh,
And they're like,
interesting.
oh, because yeah, they're like, oh, because I told you to like, you know, be quieter or like be, blah, blah, blah. Like that's how you got to where you are today. And it's like, no, like, were you the person who went through, like this like subway experience and like
Yeah.
found out more about, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you weren't there, or like, were you there in my interviews? Like, no, like you weren't there. It was me. And so I think it's interesting how like once you become yourself, people are either going to be happy for you and like accept it and like pretend they were there championing you the whole time, or like not accept it because they haven't grown to their fullest potential yet and don't want to be left behind this train to self-discovery. So
Yeah.
I think like check your environment, check your people. And I think me and Flo were talking last week about how we wish we had more people in our community who we could, bounce ideas with, relate with, that were also passionate about growth and finding life outside of our careers. Like I think, yes, I'm very passionate about and very happy that I am where I am today, but at the end of the day, my goal is to like bring delight to people. It isn't to like complete all these tasks for work. And so I think that's something where like I'm looking for people who think alike and where we can just like inspire each other, because honestly in my circle it's not that many people that I can say have that same drive.
It's one thing I talked to, like we talked about this last week, and a friend of mine who nudged me like in this direction, because I think like one thing that people like us who already know they're probably stuck in the wrong environment. I notice what some of us do, and I think it's totally normal, is we isolate ourselves because we know we're in the wrong thing, so we want to just be alone. And I think it's really hard to find then the positive like people, like the positive environments. And I think also it's like I feel like if you're like, especially like in the environment you are right now, there's also very few in like a similar age range that really like do something similar or really get you or have like the same experience to know, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So I think that's something I noticed from last time we talked, like how important it is for us to come out of isolation and bring more of that into the public so people can join us along, and maybe even this can eventually become like something where people can just jump in and have like an open conversation like we're having right now. um, One
Totally.
thing, if you don't mind, that I'm like still super curious about is and that's more almost like on the tactical side, because that's something I'm always interested in. I'm a huge fan of just like testing things, journaling things, and see how they affect me. And I know it's like for you, and this is coming back to Goldman's, like working the hours you worked, and I know like you were one of the people who like were actively pushing and working long hours. How did you like find like a yourself? How did you not forget who you wanted to be? And like when you were in this conflict of, oh, things are wrong, did you have like some pillars of like things you can orient yourself towards to be like, hey, no, this is who I want to become? Did you have like some almost like a mentor? Did you have like books? Did you have people who inspired you? It's like what ripped you out of your, because it's very easy in my opinion to get lost in just work, especially if there's a deadline, and we both know at Goldman there's always a deadline even if there isn't. So it's very easy to just keep working until you fall asleep. Did you have anything that kind of ripped you out of that and showed you the bigger picture again?
Yeah, definitely. I think in New York, so I'm an extrovert at heart, and I looked outside to find those sources of inspiration. So for me, in New York, you can go anywhere. Like there's museums, there's art galleries, or there's like bookstores, or just going to a park, and that's where you can kind of like learn more about yourself. So one of the key areas is I was part of a group called Women in Product, and they would have meetings every month, and they would be in cool offices around the city. And there would just be women who are just really passionate about making impacts in their role. And I think it was really nice for me to step out of my comfortable environment and then meet people who were inspirations to me. Like they were boss women in companies dominated by typically men and working really hard and sharing their results because they also wanted to help other women as well. And so I think for me, that was one of my sources. It's just like meeting new people, going into an environment with people that you want to be like. And so I think that was super helpful. I think I also just like spent alone time in the city. I think my favorite thing to do was just taking the train up to Central Park, finding a hidden nook, reading, or just people watching. And I think just taking the time to watch people and their lifestyles helped me feel encouraged that I don't have to be where I am today. People are finding happiness in the simple things in life, and I deserve to find happiness in those things too. And I think that's how I found myself and reminded me of myself. Is I think Central Park is such a, everyone thinks of New York when they think of Central Park, and I think that always reminds me, like, hey Liz, you came to New York for a reason. Don't forget why you're here and throw it away becoming someone that you aren't. I think I was like recognizing that this person I was becoming isn't who I was on a mission to become. And so I think those were like my two outlets, but it's honestly still a work in progress. I'm still trying to figure it out. But recently I've been reading two books that I wanted to share if you guys find inspiration through reading. Um, on the topic of work environment, this is a book called No Rules Rules. It's written by the CEO of Netflix. And as a future entrepreneur, I really wanted to understand how successful companies cultivate work cultures where they're able to retain top talent by harboring a more healthy work culture. Now, I don't think Netflix has necessarily the healthiest, but it's very interesting because he does go through all of the different tactics that they tested and trialed and erred. And so I think this was a really good read because it taught me that there are outlets to allow talented people to grow without subduing them. And I think that's what Netflix has done a really good job at. Um, and then if you want a fun read, if you guys watch SNL, Colin Jost, his memoir, I found this really fun, not only because I got to laugh every other line basically, but also he's somebody who you wouldn't expect to who he is. Like he grew up in Staten Island, and if you're from New York, you all know what Staten Island means. Like I've never been to Staten Island, so I think that should describe to you what Staten Island means in respect to the rest of the city. But he hustled. Like there's only like 30 SNL writers, and he is a small town boy from Staten Island, and he got to achieve his dream. And I think what's really cool is that he also chased life. He didn't just chase careers, and so every day his job is to make people laugh and make people happy. And so I think this was also a really good read. And so I think just like find people who you want to be like and just like learn from them, and or go into an environment where you can just hear your own voice. And sometimes for me, that's being in a large crowd of people like Central Park, but I felt so at peace because I could only hear myself. And so I encourage that to everyone if they find it relatable.
That's awesome. I love how like the because I love that the medium might change, but I feel like from what I heard from all of my friends and like obviously including you, it's everyone like finds inspiration in other people. And I feel like it's always a connection of other people reminding you and then like shifting your gaze kind of inwardly and realizing, oh my God, it's like where I am, like where am I compared to what other people are doing. And that's like the number one tool is like people are telling me is like they love people watching. They love just yeah, just be like a just be passive in the city and let the city happen to you and let remind you like
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is like I am not just a person but I am in this huge construct and what can I contribute to it. So I love this thing, and then obviously like learning from a mentor, and that's like I think like a thing that I noticed myself is like you can learn from anyone, and books are a perfect way to get like your environment. Like being part of an environment also means like it could be a book, it could be a person talking. You love what you said, and this is something that helped me a lot too, is meetups, like having actually like having a contact, having people like real people, and the clarity. I keep talking like so highly about clarity because every single person in there was very different from what I expected or I came to know from like a German work environment, which like I don't have a lot of experience in it because I only worked at one job in Germany. Like all the things I like learned, like especially about developers, is oh yeah, you can't be social and a developer. It's like you gotta be like quirky and a little bit strange sometimes, and people don't have to like you, but you're a developer. And then I joined Clarity, and people were like insanely smart developers and incredibly nice people, and like saying like the product people were like so smart and they understood so much and were on a personal level so nice. And it pulled me out of this thinking of like you have to be a certain way. And I saw like for the first time I actually saw 30 personalities working together insanely well. It's like there was no conflict. There was not like, oh, I hate this person, because everyone was themselves and everyone accepted each other. And it was so much easier accepting each other because no one was like in a bad mood because everyone was able to be themselves. So I feel like just drawing energy from people is such a good tool if you're like us, like a slightly like with like an extroverted nudge. I also love how you said in your like
Yeah,
almost like vulnerable time, like you loved riding the subway, which seems so counterintuitive, and it's probably something I would never do because I absolutely like detest the subway. But I get the point. It's just very interesting to me that you found like peace in, or that had like some of the journey was like the journey on the subway to Central Park, which is probably something I should do
totally.
more often now. I definitely stopped riding the subway now that I came back.
Definitely.
Do you have as
Yeah,
like
I find peace.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna add like I just peace in crowded places.
Yeah.
When my mind's focused on other crowded things. So
It's one of my most productive environments, funny enough, are coffee shops. And I keep telling people it's not because everyone thought I'm distracted by the people, but I really love being around people, like being surrounded by people, but they don't talk to me. It's like I can be like a bystander, but I'm not alone. It's like this is like my most productive environment, and this is why I love like I say my New York family are good friends I met who opened a coffee shop close to where I live, and I used to be there every day to work. And it was like
cool.
my inspirational thing was just being surrounded by creative people all the time, who not necessarily always talked to me so I could focus on my work, but I always had the chance to talk to them. So like the people watching to me is very important. Um, and this is more like as a closing thing, because I don't want to steal like a lot of your time. As a closing thing, like do you have anything that like where you when you think back, like do you have anything that really shaped you? There's like this one moment you notice, oh my god, it's like I'm doing something wrong. Did you have like any of these like wake up moments along the journey?
I feel like there were so many that provided different type of wake up calls.
Uh-huh.
But I think the biggest one was just when I first got to New York, I was like, why haven't I been living my truest self the whole time? And I
Yeah.
think whether it's New York or whether it's another new city for someone else, like I think it's just like getting out of your environment and just like taking a breath of fresh air and a new one is so so nice to finally meditate and understand like who you are and like where you want to be. And so I think like those were wake up calls in the sense like this is where I should be. Like this is like who I want to become. Um, but I definitely think like people shape who you are so much. So I'm so grateful for my close friends who still supported me even when I sounded like, you know, a bit crazy at times, chasing after all of these you know, highly competitive dreams. But yeah.
Do you have now, like looking back to the older self, and I know it's sometimes hard because like things get muddy, and at least like to me, I don't like sometimes I forget like who I even was. But do you have like some things that are so obviously different? And usually I need my friends to remind myself that I used to have like very different opinions on certain topics. Is that something you notice too, where you feel like old Elizabeth was like in these certain things very different, like the new one is?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of backbone. And I think before I would never stand up or speak up for anyone. And I think through becoming like a PM and through finding myself, I love exercising my backbone. So if somebody says something that I don't necessarily agree with, I'm happy to share my opinion. I'm happy to share my point of view. Before I would be so scared to because I would be concerned they wouldn't like me, they would think I'm uncool, and I wouldn't be able to be their friend. And I think now I have so much more confidence in sharing my backbone and standing up for quiet voices because I used to be that quiet voice.
Hmm.
And so I'm really passionate about elevating um, voices from the Latinx community. So I know that there's very low representation in from the Latinx community in tech companies, and I really want to help bring more people and give them more opportunities in tech. And so for me, that's kind of my goal, my passion, and I hope that in my future project when I do own my own business, it's to elevate quiet voices because that's been my whole life. I wish that someone was there to elevate mine, but now I'm willing to elevate one, two, thousands, millions of voices so that they can become who they are and be an awesome addition to this world and contribute more life. And so I think that's my passion.
Wow. Could there be any better closing thought than this? I don't know if there's like something you wanted to add, but like this would have been my last question. Like what's like a mark you want to leave? This is insanely inspiring to me, and I'm definitely going to rewatch this multiple times if I can't reach you and talk to you in person, because that's obviously my advantage I have. But thank you so much for sharing this. Opening up about this, like I know it's like with every personal experience and development, there's a lot of like things you had to like digest and explore, so it can be like really personal. Thank you for sharing this and giving us insight and being this inspiration that you are for like to me, but I feel like there's a lot more people who can really draw inspiration from your journey and the lessons you shared with us. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Flo, for choosing me as your first guest. I'm so honored. And I'm always happy to be a resource for anybody who has any further questions.
Awesome, thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, leave a like so we'll know and we'll create more content like this. Also, if you've been in a similar situation, put it in the comments and let us know how you broke the cycle. And lastly, if you want to learn more about Elizabeth, I'll tag her Instagram in the description, so just go there, click on it, and I see you guys around. Take care.